Hey guys, today is part 2 of our series on the traits of civilizations, and today we are going to be looking at the political developments that came to define early civilizations. Here are your video goals. You've got 3 questions and 5 key concepts. Okay, so let's just start by talking about what politics is. So the fancy definition is that politics is the system that determines the distribution of legitimate power among members of society. That is, who gets to decide what a society does. Legitimate power is where you make other people do stuff and you're allowed to do this. So who in a society is allowed to make other people do things? A simpler way of asking these political questions is, who gets to be the leader? What powers does the leader have over the people they're in charge of? What responsibilities do leaders have to their followers? And who gets to control different parts of the world? So these are different political questions that historians ask. And what we're going to see in today's video is that as we go from early hunter-gatherer bands to the first civilizations, that answers to these questions change. Pre-civilized societies answered these questions very differently than civilized societies did. So before the emergence of civilizations, back in the time where we were all living as hunter-gatherers or maybe small farmers in little villages, political organization was really simple. All these different groups were very small. There were only like 30 or 40 people in a hunter-gatherer band, for example. So everybody knows everybody else. And what this means is that if you have a problem with somebody, you can just go up and talk to them and figure it out that way, or maybe have a friend help resolve the difference. So you don't really need a formal system of laws for this. And if it comes down to having to make a big decision, everybody gets a say. It's not like one dude just says what we're going to do and we all do it. No, everybody would get together in a big circle and everybody would get to say their ideas and the group would decide together what made the most sense. As I already mentioned, there's no written law codes because there's no such thing as writing. Instead, there's just some basic rules and traditions that evolve over time. And last of all, there's no formal boundary between your area, your group's area, and another group's area. There are really so few people that people move around and change areas all the time, and there's not necessarily any fixed area where you have to stay. So just to sum all that up, politics before civilization is pretty simple, and it's because the groups are small and it's pretty easy to work out conflicts and make decisions just by talking to everybody. This all changes with the rise of civilization. And it basically changes because society gets so much bigger. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how decision-making and leadership changes when groups grow from 30 or 40 people to 30 or 40,000 people. So the first big change that comes directly out of the economic stuff that we looked at yesterday is social stratification. And here's how it works. With the rise of irrigated agriculture and increasing trade, there's more stuff to go around, there's more people. There's also more specialization and more inequality. Some people have a lot more wealth and a lot more power than other people. For example, kings and priests have a lot more wealth and power than farmers and laborers do. And so what this results in is you have different groups within a society that have different amounts of power and responsibility. And so the basic breakdown you see is this sort of pyramid structure here. And this happens in all civilizations. The biggest group at the bottom are poor farmers and laborers. And the top group, the kings and the priests and generals, don't actually make anything. They just make decisions. And they control society, and they're also supposed to protect society. The middle group is usually made up of people who provide special services for the top group. And this is usually people like soldiers who are really good at fighting and carrying out the top group's orders, and craftsmen who make special stuff for the top group. And the bottom group, the farmers and laborers, their only main job is to provide food and work for the top groups. So it's not a really fun picture, but that's just how it works in every civilization we're going to look at. So as a result of increasing social stratification, as the dudes on top become more and more powerful, you see in a lot of areas the rise of states. And a state is a special type of human group that meets two criteria. One is that a state has clearly defined boundaries. Unlike hunter-gatherer bands that just wander around, a state has borders where if you go into these borders, then you have to listen to whatever the state says. And once you go outside, then the state's not allowed to tell you what to do. And second, the government within the state has a monopoly on the use of violence. That government is the only person or only group within the state that is allowed to use violence to make you do stuff. So for example, in today's society, if you don't pay your taxes or if you break the laws, the government is allowed to arrest you or use other kinds of violence to make you do what it wants you to do. And this is true for every state and every civilization that we're going to look at. So for example, or just to break it down a little bit more, anybody who lives in a state has to listen to what the king says. And the king is allowed to use violence to make people listen. And the most important part here is that the king is so powerful that nobody can really hope to fight back. If the king was weak, or if everybody was strong enough to fight back against the king, then we would not have a state, because the king wouldn't really be in charge. And so that's what makes a state different from earlier forms of civilization, is whoever's in charge is so strong that you basically have to do what he says. The next development, moving on from the formation of states, is the emergence of big empires. And this takes a little while, a few thousand years. But after the first states that emerge are really small. They're basically just a city and the fields that surround the city where they grow the food. And you can see a picture of what that might have looked like up top. But as time goes on and states get bigger and more powerful, they start to expand to take over neighboring areas and neighboring groups of people. And these turn into empires. And so an empire is a type of state in which a dominant central area is able to establish permanent control over other areas. So basically you go out and you take over your neighbor's stuff, your neighbor's area, and you tell them what to do. And what empires do is after they take over these neighboring areas, then they take stuff from those areas and bring it back to their home and use this stuff to make themselves wealthier and more powerful. That's what an empire is. And we're going to look at a bunch of empires that expand and collapse over the next couple thousand years. And one last development that happens in all civilizations that reach a sufficient stage of complexity is they develop sets of written legal codes. And the reason for this is that it's very hard to run a city or an empire without written rules. If you don't write down what all the different rules are, people aren't going to know how the society works or what they have to do. So what happens is kings, it's usually a king, sometimes it's priests, write down all the society's rules, and these stay that way and maybe change slowly over time. But this has some serious advantages to it. One is everybody knows what the rules are. That way you're not just going to get randomly killed or arrested for something that you didn't know was against the rules. Two, if everybody knows what the rules are, it makes it easier for large groups of people who don't know each other, to work together. Because we all know that you can't go at a red light, that means we can all drive even though we haven't met the other people that we're driving with. And last of all, and maybe most interestingly, is once the rules are written down as a law code, kings and other governments can claim that the reason they're in charge is to uphold the law and to maintain justice and order within society. So the king is able to say, hey man, I didn't I didn't make the rules, I just enforced the rules, right? Even though in many cases he did write the rules, or his dad wrote the rules or something like that. But so anyway, legal codes become very important. We're going to look at a number of legal codes that emerge throughout history in this class. All right, thanks for listening. Remember to make sure to answer these questions and to try to define those key concepts.